thing between play and learning, as if they're two different things.
I think it is the apex of like self-actualization.
So I just don't understand why the education hierarchy just don't see that that learning is actually far richer than getting it down on a piece of paper.
Imagine how different like the school system would be if all schools kind of supported play and that, you know, children were intrinsically motivated. Hi Liz, lovely to see you. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks, Louise. It's lovely to be with you today, have a chat and a catch up.
And I've known you for a very long time. In fact, we were just reminiscing, like I seem to remember, you know, it must be over 15 years ago because I remember when you were pregnant and you said that your eldest is already 15. So it must be a
Yeah,
long time since I've known you.
I think so.
Perhaps we should start with you telling us a little bit about your journey into forest school. You've been involved in forest school for decades.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, God, I don't not sure I can remember about that. I can't remember yesterday. Never mind, sort of 20 odd years ago. So I did my forest school training back in '99. So I'd been working in the Peak District National Park doing environmental education, and just looking at different sort of avenues. I was working part time there, and also I live in Sheffield, so working in the outdoors as a sort of outdoor pursuits instructor as well. So I had lots of bits and bobs jobs. So forest schools kind of sounded like it fit in with that sort of freelance work. So yes, I went and did my training in '99 at Bridgewater, and yeah, it was like many people, sort of had a really fantastic experience. It pulled loads of things together. One of the main things for me, which I thought was really exciting about forest schools, was that working on in sort of the outdoor sector, you quite often would get kids just coming for maybe like an outing that's just once a year or something like that. Or when I worked on expeditions, it might be almost sort of like a once in a lifetime experience where people are coming out and having that experience abroad. So that's very much life changing, going on a trip, an adventure training trip, being taken into the mountains and stuff. So that's fantastic. And then I was working at the Peak District National Park, where we'd have kids who were coming out maybe once a year on their sort of school trip, their school residential trip, and we would sort of spend time with them. So that was also exciting and worked really well. But then when forest schools came in and we looked at it on a weekly basis, then that's what was really impactful for me, I think, to sort of think of all those experiences outdoors that I was having, but they were sort of more spread out, to be able to do that on a weekly basis and it to be slightly less dramatic but much more impactful. So yeah, that's why forest schools really sort of, it really hit the mark for me back then, when I started off. So yeah, so I got into forest schools and started working with groups and set a business up doing training. So I think after practicing for a couple of years, so about 2001, I think the training business started, and we were doing forest schools and training back then, I think. And yeah, and then got involved in all the forest school networks. So yeah, so what's that, 22, 23 years ago, doing that. And yeah, so and then just over the years, just been involved in forest schools in different ways. So I finished with the training company in 2006 and set Muddyfaces up. So and launched that in 2007. And that came about from lots of people coming on the training courses saying, where do we get the kit from? And back then there was no forest school suppliers. People just had to really sort of scrabble around to find it in sort of DIY stalls and things like that. So I thought, you know what, it'd be really helpful for a lot of people who were time short to be able to come and get their stuff from one place. So Muddyfaces was born, and I kind of found all these different suppliers, from health and safety gear, outdoor clothing, and tools and stuff like that, and brought it all together at Muddyfaces.
Amazing, yeah, to hear the journey from practitioner, or from outdoor educator into practitioner, forest school, into training, and then yeah, into resourcing. And the one of the topics that I thought would be kind of on theme for this conversation, it would be around resourcing play, because play is such like a big part of forest school. Well, I guess it is the heart of what we're doing at forest school. And of course, we're out in ideally a woodland or a natural environment where there are all these amazing loose parts, but actually sometimes having a little bit of extra kit might be useful. I mean, a question I often get asked as a forest school trainer is like, well, I've got this amount of money in my budget, what do I need to buy? So maybe we should start there. What would you tell somebody who asks that question?
Yeah, well, I think we've had that quite over the years quite a few times, and I think my advice is a ball of string. So that's my advice. And you don't need to spend all that money that everyone's sort of saying that you need to spend, and to start off with a small amount of resources and then move on as you develop your program, so that once you've got into it and you know which way it's heading, which way the kids are heading, and then you can sort of say, right, okay, they're into sort of, they've asked about lighting fires, so right, I might get some resources around supporting sort of fire lighting, and even taking that on to cooking and advancing that. So I think it's always a tricky one, because right at the start people would sort of say, oh, can I get a forest school kit? And I was really resistant about making a kit, just sort of a set of resources, because every forest school is so different and people want to do different things on their forest school. I think having a set of resources I felt was sort of counterintuitive, but we can't ask so much. What I decided to do is to kind of split the ideas of resources up. So we have a little starter set that's just got a few bits in it. But then I sort of, one of the things I was noticing was a lot of practitioners were coming off their forest school training and their confidence with tools was not very high. And I very much felt that they were sort of saying, oh, we've been told we need to get knives, we need to do that. And I'd say, if you're not personally confident at using those tools, then it's not a good idea to start trying to use tools. So I sort of said, why don't you just get some resources that are not tool based, bring, practice with those tools with yourself, maybe at forest schools with the children being there, but not actually introducing it with the children until your confidence is built up. So I've split the resources down. So I've created some forest school kits that are sort of activity sets, which are just resources which could support different children's child-led play. So like might be just some digging material, some string, might be some ID things. There could be also like some tarpaulins or some rope for den building. So depending which way the children are taking the play, having some simple resources that can cross over and do different jobs, so that the tarp and the string might be able to put up a shelter if it's raining, but could also be used for den building. And so you kind of you don't need loads of stuff. And actually, that I think quite often as you become more confident, you need less stuff. I think when I first started out as a practitioner, I don't know if it's the same for you, Lou, but I used to take loads of stuff with me because I kind of was a bit anxious about what we're going to do. I'm going to run out of stuff to do. But then when you're in a natural environment, the environment leads that play and that investigation, and you discover the resources you need as you build your confidence are actually a lot less. And having too much stuff becomes kind of cumbersome and kind of takes away. So I think as you develop your practice, you end up kind of going, right, I don't need all that stuff, but yes, yeah, some tarp, some string, and then depending whether you're going to have fires or use tools, then you'll have your select resources. But to build up really gradually and actually just trust the environment and let the children have time outdoors, and then let that lead the resources that you're going to get. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'd say my bit of advice will be less is more, but to definitely have just a few things that you can roll out. And a piece of string is the best. You can do an autumn leaf mobile with a piece of string. You can make a den with a bit of string. You can tie a tarp up with a bit of string. So yes, that string is my ultimate bit of forest school kit. I think also the other element where people are looking for advice is a lot of people kind of are thinking of kit and resources, but I think the most important bit of kit that you can have at forest schools is the clothing. So if you've got clothing that is comfortable for children to wear, that enables movement and enables them to play, it means that they can kind of kneel down, crawl. So robust trousers or bib and brace or dungarees or whatever you want to call it, something like that for young children, which means that they can kind of really engage. They can lie on their tummies on the ground and they're not getting soaked through when they're sitting down or kneeling down. I think that piece of clothing is the most enabling resource that you could have at a forest school. And I don't, when you've got the woods, you don't need anything else. But when the children are in there, they need to be safe and healthy. And by having clothes that help them to do so, I think that's probably the most important resource there is, in my opinion, my humble opinion of supplying resources. So yeah, we'd always recommend that people invest any budget that they've got on decent waterproof trousers and or dungarees, and not so much the jackets, because jackets actually, even though we live in the UK and we feel it rains all the time, it doesn't actually rain all the time. So jackets quite often are taken off and lost, or put, not lost, I mean like just lost from the space and put to one side, so they're not actually used as much. So obviously if you've got the budget for quality trousers and jackets, that's a good idea. But I think the one thing I'd be looking at is the quality trouser to keep people dry.
Yeah, I
Don't know if you've
totally agree about like the clothing things. It can be the difference between having a comfortable group who are, like you say, able to engage and play in a joyful, happy way, and the difference between a group that are cold and wet and miserable and, you know, early stages of hypothermia, worst case scenario, which of course, if we, you know, for a school being a long-term process, we want people to feel safe and comfortable and enjoying their experiences, whereas, you know, a cold, wet, uncomfortable experience could actually be turning people off of spending time in nature.
yeah. And I think with all resources, it's about having a realistic expectation of longevity as well. So my youngest son, he went to an outdoor kindergarten, and when his peers went to school, we decided he was really enjoying his outdoor kindergarten, so he stayed until I think until he turned 5 or something like that, which was the last term of school. So he had a couple of terms where his peers, so he ended up during that period going every day to the outdoor kindergarten, just kind of getting into that sort of longer day without actually going to school. And he had some nice clothing to wear from us at Muddyfaces, so I kitted him out. But I was realistic that he was outside. There wasn't an indoor space at his outdoor kindergarten, so for the whole of the year he was outside, and he was outside every day for that period as well. And so he had top quality clothing, but after being in that clothing, I had 2 pieces that I swapped back and forth with him, because that's like the most intense sort of UK weather, whole year outdoors is about as intense as you could get. So he had a couple of pairs, and a couple of good quality pairs of trousers lasted him the whole of that year. And that shows that they're good quality things. Whereas if you buy cheap stuff, it just doesn't last the same. So, but it's about being realistic as well. I think it's the same for shelters, that if you buy a lightweight shelter that you use every day, it's not going to last as long as one that you put up once a week. So again, it's just about that. It's like how often are the clothes being worn by the children? And it might be something that needs to be, if you're doing lots of forest schools at your school and lots of children are coming out every day in that same clothing, then it might be that clothing, although it might be good quality, might not, will need to be replenished quite regularly. But I think it's worth that investment, because it just enables everybody to kind of get out, like you say, in a safe and warm and comfortable manner, and just not get wet through. I think that's it. When you sit on your bum or kneel on the ground, you don't get wet through. And the good stuff as well doesn't rip it doesn't rip through if it gets caught on brambles. It might get a little snag in it, but it doesn't tend to rip out, whereas the cheaper clothing tends to rip out all the way down if you kind of snag it on brambles as well.
Yeah, and I guess like kids at forest school really do test that clothing in terms of putting it through its paces. It's not, it's not like a lot of like adult waterproof gear is designed for walking, isn't it? Like walking through the woods, whereas the kids are rolling and climbing and digging and going through the wilderness areas.
Yeah.
So it's
And I
really
think
putting it to its test.
yeah, and I think if you've got a slide that's a mudslide or a kind of gravelly slide, and the children are sliding down on their bottoms, and they're doing that a number of times, it doesn't matter how good your clothing is, it's going to struggle to cope with that. But it doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. It just means that you've just got to be aware that if you're running a session that includes something like that, and they're actually sliding on their bottoms, then that it's not going to last as long. But a lot of the robust stuff is amazing how well it does last up against that sort of stuff.
It's also made me think about how sometimes I've seen some forest school projects where they've invested, they've got a grant or sponsorship or something, and they've got loads of clothing for the kids, but then sometimes the adult helpers are completely lacking, should we say, in clothing as well. So I guess I'd also highlight that if you've got volunteer helpers or other colleagues that are helping you at your forest school, perhaps give them some advice and support about what clothes to wear to help facilitate the play at forest school as well, so that they're able to interact without being uncomfortable. Because again, like sometimes you see the kids that are having a whale of a time, like you say, sliding down the mud and running through the rain, and the helpers are like shivering in the corner and not being able to actually do their job to help facilitate the play. So yeah.
But I think yeah, I totally agree. And I think in a lot of settings, not just forest schools, but in nursery settings as well, that because the adults aren't comfortable, a lot of the plays cut short too quickly as a result of adults not being comfortable. And it's definitely it's I almost feel it's more important for the adults to be comfortable than the children, because the children generally are being so much more active, that they're generating so much more heat, that they can they just look after their general temperature. They don't feel the cold in the same way because they're being so much more active. But for the adults who may be less active, then that cold will set in, and that becomes quite uncomfortable, particularly sort of around people's backs here and stuff like that. And I think it's just something that when people are buying clothing, they need to squat down in the clothing, because a lot of practitioners will drop down to the children's height or kneel down on the ground, and then that leaves this big sort of gaping hole at your back that we've all experienced, where the wind whips up your back. And again, it's just sort of having the correct clothing, like you say, to be really make you to be the best assistant to play that you can be. And I think to be able to sort of interact appropriately and be involved as you need to be involved in that play, and it means that you need to be able to move around comfortably in that clothing. The clothing needs to fit well, and it needs to do its job, so it needs to be sort of reasonable quality as well.
Yeah, I just want to pick up and highlight something you said there in terms of like how the adults feel in the environment might reduce the amount of time that they allow the child to play. I'm just sort of, maybe not specifically at forest school, but more generally, perhaps in nursery settings or play settings, which is just like, yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that way before. That but
I think
our influence on the opportunities to the children to play,
it will affect it at forest schools, maybe in a different way. It might be that the session's not cut early, but it may affect the practitioners. So maybe not the other thing is, I don't know if you've experienced this when you've been running training, or maybe being the lead practitioner in a situation where you've got maybe adult helpers, because you're busy delivering your training or running the session, your adrenaline is up and you're moving around quite a lot, and you're actually quite comfortable. And maybe because you're more experienced being in the outdoors, you're wearing slightly clothing that's you've thought through a bit more to be in the outdoors. But the people who are assisting you, they've got less adrenaline, that they're not leading it, they're not moving maybe quite so much, and maybe haven't got the experience to be wearing the clothing in such a useful way. And then their influence, because if they are then starting to feel uncomfortable, that affects their mood and their ability to engage with the children. So it might not be, all right, everyone's fed up, we're going home. It might not be as dramatic as that, but it will all affect the engagement and the involvement and the response and the way that the adults respond to the children's play, and where the children are taking the play. The adults might be a bit less reticent to go to do that, or to do that because they are not feeling comfortable. So I think that the adults are always the most important thing, I think, because children will, as we know, generally they will play wherever they are, given the space and the time and the opportunity, they'll make the most of their play. But quite often it's the adults. So adults that are sort of potentially interfering too much, asking too many questions. What are you doing? What's that? What's, you know, that are getting involved like that, right through to sort of, like I say, maybe an adult who's physically uncomfortable because of the environment or what they're wearing, and just being in that environment that they're not familiar with, and that will all affect the children. So it's not as dramatic as maybe teachers or practitioners deciding it's a bit cold now because they've not they've just got their slip-on shoes and they've got the coat on, but the legs aren't covered properly, and then they call everybody in. It's kind of can be a much more subtle effect than that as well.
I'm liking this idea of framing it as like a professional responsibility to, you know, to know how to dress and be comfortable in the outdoors. It is like a professional responsibility, because like you say, it's going to affect our ability to work as forest school leaders or forest school assistants. Which is
and to be mindful of the adults that you've got with you, whether you've got some parent helpers or whoever you've got with you, that actually, you know, they very much role model. They should be the role models and leading the investigations and the plays and stuff like that, rather than actually just sort of being uncomfortable and slightly negative. They want to be very sort of positive and responsive to that. So I think it's really important to look after all the adults that are involved as well. I think, you know, we always kind of, as a leader, it's quite easy to think, oh, I'm responsible for this group of children, but you actually you're responsible for the whole group, which includes adults as well.
And I guess what we're talking about here, under that sort of theme of resourcing play, there is the physical resources like the strings and the tarps and things that you've mentioned, but here are also like the almost the attitudes and the skill sets of the people that are there is also resourcing the play. So like you know, you've just mentioned there things like the person's mood or whether they interfere too much in the play, as examples there. So what sort of attributes do you think are useful for adults to have to resource play?
Well, I think it's always like enthusiasm is always the enthusiasm to be in the environment. I don't mean just necessarily enthusiastic, just like they're there, but to be like comfortable and happy. So I think that the adults need to make sure that, from their point of view, that they are well equipped to be in that and that's emotionally as well as physically, to be in that environment. And I think, and from there, then they can be able to make the observations. So I think the attributes, I guess, as any practitioners who are leading play, is to be able to observe that play, and quite often, if they get invited, to be involved in that play without leading that play. And to I guess it's always tricky, isn't it? It's just that, so when you're seeing a child who's struggling to do something, it's so difficult, isn't it, to kind of step in. I remember right back at early on in my forest school journey, going out to Denmark and just going out with a forest kindergarten where they travelled. They all met at a kindergarten and then went out to the woods. And I remember back then, just, it was interesting, challenging my preconceptions about those sorts of attitudes, about how much to be involved. So I remember we were heading out and a child fell over on the sort of gravelly path and ended up being a bit tearful. And my immediate reaction was to go and just sort of help them up. And this is really early on in my forest school journey. And the practitioners there said, "Oh, no, leave them. They're fine. The kids." So, you know, so we all stayed back, and we didn't get involved. They soon stopped crying, and then they carried on. And I remember thinking, oh, it was a bit hard, and the kids ran on, and we went through the day, which was just a sort of it was a lovely day where they led the way to the woods. They knew the spots to stop and wait and gather, and then they ran down a path whilst they were waiting and did that. And I remember thinking, even with the practice, I remember feeling that, oh, it felt a little bit hard, that the actual interaction of the adults. But then what I did notice, when I say hard, I mean they just didn't it didn't seem to show much sympathy for situations where the children were struggling to do things or were upset about something. But then what I noticed is on the way home at the end of the day, when the children were tired, the practitioners were holding hands with the children walking home. So the children would come and hold hands. And I kind of realized that they were actively not getting involved to allow that practice to unfold, to allow that situation, so to allow the children their child-led play experience, that they were not just responding to every time a child struggled to use a tool that they were using, or they let it play out for a while. And I remember that was a really good learning process for me, sort of early on in my sort of forest schools sort of days, just to sort of observe that and actually have that very much emotional feeling myself, thinking, oh, I felt a little bit uncomfortable allowing it to play out. So it was good to be, it was good to see them do it, but then actually then see them be more what appeared to be more caring on the way back when the children needed them, when the children came to them and needed them, but actually the children didn't need them earlier, so they just stayed back.
Yeah, it sounds like they were so attuned to knowing those individual learners that they knew them so well by the sounds of it. They knew when to step in and when not to step in. But that idea of like adversity and challenge and risk being a really rich place for learning and development is something that really fascinates me. And of course, as we know, that's one of the principles of forest school, isn't it? Right, to expose people to an appropriate amount of risk. And perhaps in play is, you know, there's all sorts of different risks, physical ones, but also you know, emotional, social risks. I believe like the actual act of play as an expression of a person's intrinsic motivation is risky in itself. You are expressing yourself to the world, right? So, you know, like you're showing your authentic true nature. That is a risky thing in a judgmental world. And so yeah, that's something that I really love reflecting on, and like exploring that the importance of adversity for healthy childhood development, and adult development. I think we need it too, but particularly in childhood.
Yeah, but I think outdoors is just, that's why we love the outdoors. That's why we practice in the outdoors for so long, and it's just, the outdoors gives so much opportunity. So I don't think we value risk as an intelligence enough in children, particularly younger children. Like I say, we step in too much, we help them too much, and they need to take those risks, because those risks, when they're very young, it might be just jumping off a log or something like that. But like you say, that's all part of their development, of making judgments for when they're older and when they're going to make a decision about whether they're going to buy something or not. You know, that all that learning that's happening from those early years right through. And I just don't think as a society we value the actual risk and children's intelligence around risk enough. I think it's something that's what forest schools is fantastic for. It's what being outdoors is amazing for, because it just gives these opportunities for children to, like you say, not just risk physically but emotionally as well. And I think an indoor setting can't allow children the freedom of movement and space that the outdoors can, that allows them to sort of follow their interests and then decide where they want to take their risk. And I think also the freedom of the outdoors allows children to take risks, their own risks at their own level, without feeling that they have to be alongside everybody else. They can explore and go off and follow their own risk taking at their level, whereas another child maybe can do all climbing and jumping, but you as a person might not be able to feel that you're in that position yet, so you take another path. You might still end up there later on, but at the moment, and the outdoors allows that, and you're not so much in the limelight of what's going on, and you can kind of go off on your own and explore your own challenges. I think so, yeah. So I think risk is so important, and I just think the outdoors is just a an amazing space to sort of really do that. And I think also, like, obviously trying to talk about resources and stuff, and again, the resources that you have which allow that, so that if you're whether they're things that you're buying, but also that whether the children are allowed to climb or jump off a big tree stump in the woods, or whether you're in a setting and you've brought some pallets and tires or something like that into the setting, and they're building things out of them. So again, it's, I think the resources and the elements of the environment around you and how you interact with them and how you allow the children to interact with them sort of affects their interest in exploring and testing their risk taking abilities and problem solving.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I'm training people and we're doing the risk side of things at Forest School, you know, we always start with like value judgments and like reflecting on what's our own personal value judgment about what's the appropriate level of risk. You know, where are we with our own risk taking, and you know, where's that balance? Because it is going to be different for all of us. And that personal value judgment is going to then affect how we then work with groups of children or adults, whoever we're working with.
And that kind of goes back to when we were saying about adults feeling comfortable. So there's no reason, if the children are all jumping off of a tree stump, there's no reason, unless the adult's got a knee injury or something, there's no reason why the adult cannot go and experience that as well and jump off that tree stump and enjoy that experience of traveling for sort of a millisecond through the air and experiencing that risk taking, and actually when they get up there feeling the height of it and I think that's, and if they're feeling comfortable in themselves and in the group of people there and the clothes that they're wearing, they can actually take part in some of that risk taking themselves and kind of experience what the children are experiencing. And then also by getting involved, by doing that, the children are much more likely to sort of open up a conversation about that, you know, about what did it feel like for you, and there'll always be one who's doing some sort of special jump that's swizzing in the air or something like that. So yeah, so I think it's I think it all, well, as we know, it all fits together, doesn't it? It all slots in nicely together.
And that modeling of, whether it's modeling a skill or modeling how to interact with the environment, that is a key part of resourcing play, isn't it? That's a key part of us as adults, helping people interact with that environment. Or, you know, some it would appear that some people have never sort of played in nature, and you know, you can often see, you know, first session you bring a group of people in, you can see the kids that are comfortable, that have been in the woods, that know, you know, they're playing with sticks, they're off and away almost immediately. And then I've noticed that sometimes you see some children that they just stand there and they look at the adults and they're not really sure what to do or what's expected of them, and you know, how do I get this right, you know, what am I supposed to do? And that they need maybe a bit more support to start interacting. And it's through modeling as adults the things you could make, or the things you could do, or climb that tree, balance on that log, tie this knot, whatever it is that you're doing, is how you draw people into that state of play. Yeah, you model what you want to see in the world, kind of thing.
And also I kind of like enjoy that as well. So enjoy that play as an adult, you know, that you kind of, you can sort of see a child would maybe like to be doing something, but it's probably holding back. So you decide to just go and have a little go yourself. And then they might feel more comfortable coming to join you as an adult, or they might, as probably has happened plenty of times, they kind of look at you and then go off with the other kids. But then they've made that decision. And actually, even though you've done that, you've actually helped them make the decision of which way they're going to go and what they're going to go off and do whilst they get into the woods.
Yeah, totally. Then, and the value of like not like of modeling, like being silly, not that I think it is silly, but you know, that modeling of like, I really want to lay in the leaves and do like a leaf angel or roll around or put mud on my face, or you know, that stuff that perhaps they haven't seen adults do before. I think that can really help like put people's fear of judgment to one side. I'm thinking particularly some of the older kids, like if you're working with teenagers and stuff, you know, sometimes they can be very cool and, you know, not want to engage too much with the environment because that wouldn't be cool and stuff. And so sometimes doing what they would perceive as outrageous things can help start sort of break down some of those barriers to engaging with the land.
Well, I definitely had a project that I worked on quite a long time ago, sort of. Well, yeah, I don't even know when it was now. It was a long time ago. But we were working in Doncaster, and they had pupil referral units there then. So we worked with 6 boys from the pupil referral unit, who the pupil referral unit were struggling to sort of have in the indoor setting. So we took them out. It was a really great project because we had them out sort of 3 days a week for a whole academic year. So it was a really substantial project. But what we did, interestingly enough, was we essentially played tag for the first 20 minutes of the session. So we'd kind of drop our bags off at the site and then we'd play tag. And this became a bit that, as you tend to do, you kind of get your rituals, don't you, as you kind of visit the site. So we'd play tag. And I kind of thought that the tag over a period of time would evolve, but they were literally like, no, I just want to play tag. So we were just legging it around the woods, just playing tag every morning. It was great for everyone's fitness. But like you say, that the group, that they didn't necessarily feel safe with each other, but they felt safe with us as adults. So we needed to be part of that game for quite a long time before they started feeling safe with each other to be able to play that game. So it needed to be an adult who was either on or who was either getting sought. We had to join in because it would never, they would, and that was their, they were so they always looked so much forward to playing that game, but we needed the adult interaction. And to do that, so it's quite hard to run around the woods playing tag if you're not going to just let yourself be a little bit silly.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, that's flowing beautifully in my mind in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of like people need to feel safe to play. You know, those kids need to feel secure and safe with the group of people they were, because play is risky. You know, following from where we've come from, thinking about risk, because we are expressing our true nature when we're playing, and that is risky because what if people laugh at you, or you know, think you're silly, or you know, turn their back on you, which, you know, as a social species of human social species, the worst thing that you can do to a human is isolate them from their tribe. So again, as a thing around resourcing play, what we need to do as facilitators of play is to create that sense of safety, that sense of security, emotionally as well as physically. So do you have any thoughts on that, in terms of like, well, how do you create that feeling of security within a group at Forest School so that they feel safe enough to play?
Well, I think the biggest resource that we have is just the outdoor environment as a therapeutic environment, because I think that quite often when you take those groups, that, like you say, that some people might be anxious or nervous, but just being outside alleviates that. So if you were trying to emulate this play situation indoors, it'd probably be an absolute disaster. But outside, if the group are struggling, like you say, there might be emotional difficulties within the group, stuff like that. That just being outside means that there's the opportunity to join in when you want to join in, to take yourself away when you want to take yourself. The noise is dissipated outdoors compared to indoors, so people don't feel so confined. And I think just that in itself, the outdoor environment is just a massive tool for helping people feel more comfortable when they start to engage in play. And that's any age, from little ones up to sort of say teenagers who are all a bit cool. I think just by being outside in that environment. And then, like you say, there's lots of people who then don't necessarily feel comfortable in the outdoor environment. And then that's where either the adult involvement or it might be suitable for some of the children to take some peer roles where they're taking, like, maybe showing the sites, exploring the sites. So just making the environment not so scary to go and explore the boundaries, and for the children to lead that, and for the people who are feeling less comfortable to just follow and just observe and not feel that they have to get involved. And then once the environment has been explored, and that's the one element that might be causing anxiety, they can feel a little bit less anxious about that, and then the play can evolve quietly. And I think I've got another example where I worked with a Sure Start group where there was a lot of took young mums and their children out to the woods on it was a forest school project that again lasted for quite a long time. It was about a 12-week project, so it was quite substantial. And I remember one of the boys, he was probably about 4, and his mum sort of insisted that he needed to come in a buggy. So, like, we generally walked in, whatever the age, going at the pace so that we could kind of do that. But she had this little buggy, and he wouldn't. When we got there, all the children go off. We put a shelter up, and the children were. It was an old parachute we put up, and the children were. So we were just playing, and he wouldn't get out of his. He didn't want to get out of his buggy. You know, any amount of enticement out just doesn't seem to be working. And then once we put this, the second week, we put this parachute up that was all billowy, and it came right down to the ground. And he all of a sudden he got up out of his chair, ran in the parachute, and he stayed there all day. And then when it's time to get up, he came out and got in his buggy and went. So this is a child who obviously doesn't feel secure in the environment, but just by changing an element and bringing an element in, he felt that he could spend his time in that lovely billowing parachute. And it was really lovely. The sun was coming through the canopy, and the parachute was sort of glowing in different areas, and there was a bit of breeze making it blow in and out. And he just had the best day. And I think the first session he wouldn't get out of his, so he was just building up his confidence. He'd been there once, and he wouldn't really leave his pushchair. And then the second time he kind of got up and went into this space. And then by the end of the project, he was interacting very much. You probably wouldn't have even noticed the difference between him and some of the other children in his levels of interaction. So again, it's just a slow process and just allowing that familiarity. And that's what forest schools does, because you don't just go out once, where some children might be completely, you go out on a weekly basis. So maybe the first week they don't interact hardly at all and are quite withdrawn, and then you might see them. I'm sure you've had projects like that where children over time seem to come out, and then by the end of the project they might be leading some of the play, because actually where you felt that they were very unconfident, they actually had a lot to contribute within the group, and had got some interesting things that the other children were now following them about to do. So it's lovely to see that emotional development, and it to evolve from the start of a project to the end of the project, which again, like I say, forest schools allows, where you're going out on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. That time principle. And I've noticed with, you know, some of the groups I've worked with, that play just grows and grows, and themes and games or role plays can continue for months and months out there, and they, you know, get more and more elaborate. And in fact, I just share this story because it just came to mind as you were talking about that idea of the social dynamics shifting in play over time, where there was this was a Key Stage 2 group, and one lad who, you know, had a variety of different labels in the classroom, so he was quite often found it difficult to integrate within his peers, certainly in the classroom and on the playground. So he was often on his own. And then at forest school, in terms of like loose parts and resources, rocks were very rare in our forest school site. We didn't have many rocks, and this lad, he started like digging with sticks. He'd like made some digging sticks, and he was into digging, and so we started finding these rocks, which all the other children were like, oh, he's got rocks, you know, like and so over a process of many weeks, this really kind of elaborate like role play of like a mining operation started, and the child that, you know, usually struggled to play with other children or was often isolated from play, he became like the center character, if you like, in this role play with this mining business, and he started employing other miners to come and dig out these rocks. And then there was a processing plant where they were washing the rocks, and then there was a shop selling the rocks for leaf currency, and then there were even some builders experimenting with different cement mixtures, made building with these rocks. So you know, it basically, over a period of like about, well, it was at least sort of 8-10 weeks, this elaborate thing grew and grew and grew to, I think, pretty much all of the children in the group were at every forest school session. They were doing this mining processing shop building kind of role play that was emerging. And it all started with that one child who perhaps wasn't the most popular child in a different context in the classroom. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying about that, about how it can almost be a fresh slate as well for children who have got labels as well, and spin that social dynamic, you know, that might be different in the classroom.
Yeah, and I think also, like you say, that what's great about forest schools is it allows these children who, like you say, have got sort of one persona in the classroom to try and kind of evolve into something else. And then over time, it allows them to be different back in the classroom as well. They don't have to always revert back to how they were. They just evolve over time as well. And so that interaction with that role playing the mine over time, that possibly, you know, back in the classroom would have also had an effect on how he was with the rest of the group, which would have been probably very positive, allowing him to sort of take more risks in the indoor classroom setting as well, which is nice. And I think that's the great thing about projects or on a weekly basis or forest schools, is it allows also, as we're talking about play, it allows play to be returned to and continued. So I just mentioned to you earlier before that I'm producing a loose parts booklet working with Professor Jan White, and we've got these little tips for success that we're sort of splattering through the book, and one that I've kind of mentioned in 2 different ways was about leaving resources out for the next day or for the next session where possible. And I appreciate not all settings can do this, but where you can have a little area where the resources can be left out, where a project can be continued the next day, then what happens is that project maybe is just someone building with some building blocks, some big sort of planks and pieces of wood or something like that. And then it starts turning into something, as you talked about with the mine. Then somebody has the idea, and then it becomes something else. And for those resources to either be left out completely as they are, or if they do have to go away, that those same resources are accessible the next time they go out, so they can continue with exploring that theme of play that they're leading on. And I think that's allowing time for play, allows that sort of really rich, deep, and sort of delving right into a sort of a theme where they're playing. And I think that's what's nice about leaving stuff out. I've done it at home with my own kids with Lego projects, and the benefit is you kind of see these amazing Lego projects, and the disadvantages is like you step on a piece of Lego first thing in the morning and you're like, ah. So yeah, so I appreciate it's not always possible for resources to be left out. Actually, I've just thought of we were doing these sort of forest school sessions, and it was kind of, I think they were more taster sessions, so we weren't with the group in the long term, but we were kind of getting them out just for a couple of days. And then we somehow, it happened that the children sort of led this play, and they built a village with little sticks, with little fairy doors and little ladders going up trees. So it was an older group, sort of probably 8-9-year-olds rather than really young ones. So these things were really elaborate. One boy did got a beech nut hanging from a piece of string, and he said it was the disco ball. And it's a town hall, and that was the town hall, and had a disco ball in the town hall. So they had all this, and then they decided that there was dragons about, so they had secret passageways to escape from every little house that they built. There was like a little back entrance and a little route out, and some little zip lines around and stuff. And because it was because we were coming back the next day, we left it. So there was some string left out. That's the only bit that we left out, was some cotton string, I think, in the environment. But all these little sticks that were lined up and all these little areas where they'd moved the vegetation and the soil around, it all got left out. And I think overnight, some older kids or something had been into the site and had trashed some of the sites. So we got there, and you know, as a practitioner, they're so excited about returning to this game that they're playing. And you get there and you see the mess, and you're just thinking, like, they hadn't left anything, they'd just kicked it down and knocked it about. And it was like, oh my gosh. And then one kid goes, the dragons have destroyed our village, we've got to rebuild. And like, off they went. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought they were just going to be really gutted and that'd be the end of it, and it'll be a big disappointment. And just one little kid just shouting that out, and off they went to rebuild because the dragons had destroyed their villages. So it's nice, that whole allowing those resources to be left out for sort of for the projects to continue. So I guess going back to like resources is about, I think it's a bit different in forest schools where you might not be leaving a trace or you won't be leaving stuff out so much, but definitely for people who are doing outdoor play in their own settings, to be able to leave resources from one day to the next, sort of a bridge or a guttering system that's been set up for transporting water, to leave that out is you know, just really nice opportunity for the children to return and kind of go back over and develop, because it's very hard for projects to develop if you start from scratch every time you do it.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah.
And yeah, the depth that you can get to in terms of the child's learning and development, that you can get to a much greater depth if you allow those projects to continue. Otherwise, it is like resetting, or they end up going over the same stuff again and again, because that's as far as they can get in that time limit. But if you can kind of then start from there, you then get this much more kind of learning and development opportunities rather than going over the same ground. And yeah, like that role play of the mining operation, I certainly saw that, you know, how it evolved. And you know, kids were bringing in stuff from home, you know, they started resourcing stuff themselves. I'm like, oh, I've got this for the, you know, so that we can wash the rocks, and then I've got this, and you know, they started bringing in stuff themselves. So you know, it was rippling out from beyond the forest school session, and it was just like growing to this you know, this elaborate thing.
Yeah. Did you get any calls? Did you get any calls from parents who were concerned about the children going down mines in the forest school?
Yeah.
That's what happens when the children go back with the tall stories. We were mining, and it was like half a mile long, and they're like, oh, and they're phoning up going, I don't think it's appropriate that they should be going into mines. They're very dangerous. Like, no, it's okay. It's only like a foot scrape. It's only a foot deep scrape.
Totally, the wonder of childhood imagination. Well, and also the wonder of childhood resilience. I just love what you were saying about, you know, the dragons demolished our village, you know, the resilience that, you know, that child was showing, and that creativity and imagination that then presumably sparked the other children off to continue their play.
Yeah, and also the engagement, like you say as well. I think it probably happened as you explained in your mining situation. The engagement grows because it's infectious, isn't it? So the day before, where they were building these houses, maybe some children weren't so engaged, but by the time the dragons had destroyed it, then everybody was up for rebuilding the village, you know, with gusto. So again, it's just like that. It's just that it just spreads out, and it includes, and it becomes really inclusive then. And then children, but the lovely thing about play, though, isn't it, is that children can explore, like we were saying about the risks, they can explore their own play within a play environment, and they can still connect with other people and do their own thing at the same time. So they can kind of do their own thing and then connect, and like somebody might be playing a game and then they connect with another group, and then they might go off again to do it. And children have got this great ability, so that one child can be playing one thing and another, yet they can kind of interact those games and then separate out again. It's kind of cool.
Yeah,
I think as adults, it'd be nice if we could do that.
yeah, totally. yeah, that sort of organic and flow of how it kind of weaves. Yeah, it's fascinating. I love watching children at play, you know, playing in nature. It's so, yeah, quite amazing sometimes. Like, interestingly, it's just made me think, sometimes people ask me, so the project where the lads did the mining project, that was a project in a primary school where every child went out once a week from reception to year 6. So, you know, by the end of their primary school career, they've had 7 years worth of forest school, you know, once a week. And a question I've sometimes been asked is like, well, don't the kids get bored? You know, like, you're going out week after week for years to the same site. Like, what? Don't they get bored? You know, that's my flat answer is no.
No.
um, but what would be your response if someone was to ask you that? You know,
I'd probably possibly say, have you ever been a child, or do you have children? Because, yeah, I like you say that given the right environment, then this goes back to when we were talking about resourcing right at the start of the conversation about, as a less confident leader at the beginning of your practice, you've got all this stuff with you because you're worried that they're going to get bored and they won't have anything to do. And actually, as you become more in tune with the environment that you're going into, you realize that it's all there for them. You don't have to take this stuff in. You don't. It's the environment will provide the risk, the challenge, the sparks of imagination. You know, the sort of half decomposed tree root that looks like a dragon's head. You know, it's the environment provides everything that children need to do really interesting play. And if the play's allowed to evolve, they'll never get bored because they will always be taking it onto another level and it will evolve. And that mining will disappear, but that mining won't just stop and then something else will come about. It will evolve. And then if you carried on beyond your 8 weeks and you came back in 32 weeks, the possibilities they're not mining and selling rocks anymore, but that will have changed into something that will have changed into something else. And an equally deep play will be happening, but exploring a topic of interest. I think that a lot of people at forest schools, probably like me, have experienced the dead animal, you know, the dead whatever that there's been found on site. And I think I was working with a primary school in Sheffield, and they had a wood at the back of the school, which was nice, so they didn't have to travel off site. They could just go through a gateway into the woods. And I think it was a dead crow that they found one week, and they decided to bury it and mark the spot right at the back of the site, a place where they didn't really play. And then towards the end of the project, they'd been asking and asking and asking, can we go and dig it back up and have a look at it? I was like, well, we'll leave it a bit longer, But we went and it had disappeared. And they were like, the foxes have taken, you know, there's all these stories going on. But it's just, whether it's something like quite extreme, like the death of an animal, or whether it's just a funny shaped something that sparks imagination, there's stories and prompts for play and imagination and learning. And also this, just a bit of a bugbear, the distinguish thing between play and learning, as if they're two different things.
Totally.
Like, so when we explored that animal and we talked about decomposition and the worms eating, and you know, the soil and the fungus and all that sort of stuff, and the bacteria breaking it all down, that was learning. Whereas the fox has taken it, and then the story, well, that's kind of play. So, but why are they not the same? The story is learning. It's about them, they're processing what they've experienced and seen. And then their play will come out, and there'll be some play that will have maybe some dark elements in it. And then it'll be explored, and then there'll be some emotional development. And it's just like, why do we have to compartmentalize everything? Because play is learning, and emotional and physical development is play. It is one, and it exists as one. But play isn't regarded as very important. You go and play at forest schools, that's not very important. We're going to learn in the classroom because that's important. Like, as we know, it's not the case, is it?
Totally, I couldn't agree more. Like, play is the most natural form of learning. It's what pretty much all mammals play, don't they? It's not just human, it's something deeply rooted within our evolutionary process beyond just humans. So it must be something significant to play. And yeah, absolutely, it is learning, it is development, and totally as well about the not valuing thing. Like, I'm just about to get my soapbox, I apologize. But like, I reckon
Got a high horse here. I've got a high horse here. Climb aboard. Off we go.
I reckon there is something about, like, play, I think, is the most important thing that a human can do. Like, I think it is the apex of, like, self-actualization, as Maslow and his hierarchy of needs would say. I think play is what we're all supposed to be doing, adults and children. When Einstein came up with E=mc², he was playing. When Van Gogh painted his amazing sunflowers, he was playing. The things that we think are amazing works of human mind, intellect, art, have all come from the state of play, the state of flow. Yet, as you say, oh, they're just playing, like, it's not valued. And then we wonder why we have, like, generations of people who lack creativity or can't think outside of the box, or have to follow instructions. And here's my conspiracy theory, this is my personal opinion. Like, play empowers people. Play empowers people to express who they are in the world, to put stuff out there, to overcome adversity, to take risks. And perhaps the powers that be don't want a population of humans that are empowered, because those sorts of people would be very difficult to control, and they would be very difficult to tempt to buy stuff to make them feel better about their lives. Because if you're living your life as play, you don't need to buy shit to feel good about yourself, because you are expressing yourselves authentically. So yeah, I wonder if that plays a part. The consumeristic society that we live in, I wonder whether that actually is part of repressing play in people, but particularly in children.
Yeah, I'd like to join you on that conspiracy theory, but I think it's not even that thought through. I think it's just everything lags and it's so slow. And I think that we're so caught up in sort of educating people in a very rote way that it's just trying to change things. It's just painfully slow. So I'd like to think like you that actually it's been done by a higher thought process, but I don't think it is. I just think it's just trying to shift these old-fashioned thought processes to kind of sort of recognize that. And the irony of it is a lot of people who probably I'm just thinking about this newest generation, the generation my kids are in, which is probably sort of like 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds now, but prior to that, and progressively as you get older, your access to play was much better. So if you were born 20 years ago, it was better than if you were born 10 years ago, and going back. And a lot of those people who are directing things now had a lot of access to play. They just didn't realize it. And a lot of their education came through play, but they didn't realize it because they were playing. So they don't realize they're learning, which is the whole thing. So I think that, the value there, they don't remember that because it was just what they did. And what we don't realize now is children don't get these opportunities, and it's detrimental to society as a whole. So I think, yeah, so I just think it's sad, isn't it, that we don't. We were talking just before about people not valuing early years practitioners. They're not paid enough. The sector is completely underfunded. Yet these are babies who need, and very young children who really need quality care and practitioners working with them. and it's just sort of like, oh yeah, it's all right, they're just babies, they don't do anything. It's like, you know, it's not like the majority of their development and their social stuff actually happens, you know, when they're very young. No, they're just babies. They just lie there and just crawl about. They don't need any intellectual sort of stimulus. They don't need that. That's fine. So again, it's all a little bit skewed, isn't it? But I think we could probably go on for quite some time about that one.
And it's totally mad because the science is there as well, isn't it? There's the science
Yeah.
that backs up all the, you know, the important brain development in the first few years of life, how fundamental early years is to the future development of the child, of the person. And yet that's thought less of than education further up the age groups. It's almost like there's a hierarchy in educational terms. Yeah, like you say.
And it's definitely, yeah, and that sort of obsession we have with getting children to sit down. I mean, I remember my son just talking about being in primary school, and he comes home and goes, I think I've been sat down for over 5 hours today, mummy. It's like going, like, he's obviously had his new watch on or something, and he was like timing how long he was sat down for. So yeah, so just like, it's just this sort of, like I say, this difference between play and learning. And I think that what we need to do within the education sector is really continue to push that that's a combined thing, that from the early years all the way through, that learning is interactive, and to have some, like, to have an engineering loose parts section in your primary school yard with big planks and blocks where children can build and walk across the things that they're doing, and to have something that can lower down and they can look at levers and do all that, and to have those resources in their setting, the learning that happens there. So not just science, but we're communicating as well. So we're discussing, we're problem solving, we're using our language to resolve situations, we're coming up with ideas, we're making suggestions, we're experiencing failure when it doesn't work. All that happens within a couple of hours of being out in your schoolyard and playing with some loose parts resources, compared to sitting down and reading about something and writing about something. Like, this is my high horse. I just don't understand why the education hierarchy just don't see that learning is actually far richer than getting it down on a piece of paper. Because also, you'll find the kids who don't want to write will come back and write about that project because they're interested and excited. I bet the kids who did the mining project were more than happy to write about their mining project.
Totally.
Want to write about whatever the worksheet was that the teacher had given out, but they'd write a whole, how it all worked and how the shop, you know, it was involved in it. So again, it's just all that sort of that learning.
In
And
fact,
just
on that, as a real life anecdote to support that, so that same group asked for forest school notebooks. Wasn't my idea. They wanted them for that very reason, that they wanted to write down notes and draw pictures of all the stuff that they were doing so that they would help them remember next time. Like some of my colleagues in the school did not believe me that the children would not ask for their own workbooks. Don't be stupid. I was like, yeah, I'm not giving them the workbooks. They're asking for the workbooks. They are initiating the writing themselves because they want to do it as part of their play process. Imagine how different, like, the school system would be if all schools kind of supported play, and the, you know, children were intrinsically motivated to start writing about whatever it was, or do their maths, their measurements, whatever, because it was part of their desire in that play process. Like, imagine like the level of engagement that you would get, and presumably also the level of kind of achievement as well, rather than
I think
it.
yeah, and I think it must be really tough for teachers, because so many of them would want to have that experiential learning happening, and they just don't have the support to be able to do it. You know, in fact, actually, they will probably come up against a lot of resistance if they even try to do it. So I think it's really tough for teachers, really. I think, you know, in working within the sector, you know, they've got it tough in lots of different ways. And I think a lot of them would like to have more engaging learning going on and really get the children, especially I think having everyone coming out of COVID and they're struggling with the children in the classrooms and stuff like that, you know, just to get children out playing, to have that therapeutic physicality happening with just for everyone's mental health and the learning, it'd just be, you know, fantastic to see.
Absolutely. It's a systemic issue, isn't it? That separation of play and learning. And I guess
Mm.
that's why Forest School is so important in this sort of modern education system that seems to be, you know, the commonplace education system. Because how I see it, it's like sometimes Forest School gets in a bit under the radar. In, you know, mainstream schools kind of go, oh yeah, I heard Forest School, that sounds like a good thing, let's get that happening in our school, so that even if the rest of the school week is more rote type learning, maybe they've got an afternoon a week where they can experience true play outside in that Forest School session. So maybe Forest School can almost be a bit of a break to keep the kids sane, to keep the teachers sane. um
I think it's interesting within education as well, because like, you know, I was saying about, say, maybe some of these older politicians or whatever, that they would have had a lot of play in their upbringing. Whereas I think now, unfortunately, the way society is, I think schools are having to take a bit more responsibility to make sure children are playing, because I think maybe historically children got a lot of play outside of school. So maybe they were a bit more ready for more rote learning when they came into school. Whereas I think what's happening for schools now, what they're finding is the children aren't ready for that in the same way as maybe they were when they were living much more physical lives and stuff like that. So I think now schools are having to take a responsibility to provide that. And that's a lot to ask the schools. So we're saying you've got to meet all these educational targets. You've got to get them to this level by this age, this level by this age. And actually now you've got to look after their mental well-being and their physical well-being as well, because they're not getting that outside of school either. That's just too much for the schools.
yeah,
This asking too much of them without giving them the right support, I think.
yeah.
Sure.
Something I'm quite interested in at the moment is using Forest School philosophy to support families as well, because I definitely feel, since becoming a parent fairly recently, that my understanding of Forest School philosophy is helping me as a parent in terms of the sorts of experience I provide Lily Rowe. And I find that an interesting, what's the word, transition, not transition, you know, an interesting opportunity, edge. There's an edge there between like Forest School that predominantly up till now has been used within educational models, but then actually looking at how it might support the wider world, not just within education.
Yeah, well, I think it's I think it well everything everyone does in their lives sort of affects how they kind of bring up their own children, doesn't it? And I think that it's I think the outdoors, just the access to the outdoors. I think that many parents will find that that when they get their kids outside, often they're experiencing a better time when they're at home, like whether they're just mm, playing more calmly at home because they've got out and about. It's just some simple things there, isn't it? That parents can kind of look into and kind of explore. I think as well as Muddyfaces, I also do a training company called Outdoors Thinking, and we focus there with Outdoors Thinking. It's about people in their own settings. So actually getting out on a daily basis into the outdoors, but in your own setting. So, you know, the path that I was saying about the sort of once in a lifetime trip abroad on an expedition, and then the going on your yearly residential to the Lake District or the Peak District, and then coming out on your weekly Forest School experience there. So the next stage, which is I'm really, really passionate about now, is that almost the foundation to that, which is daily access to the outdoors. And that's including engaging parents as well, but just making sure that children, when they're in their settings and they're in the early years and primary settings, that they're accessing the outdoors substantially, not just as 20 minutes to run off to prepare yourself for sitting down again, but just really using the outdoor setting for your play and learning. So I think it's like you say, and then if we can engage parents into that daily experience, then children can take it home. So that's the nice thing about forest schools, that people take those things home and then they carry on the games at home, or they are exploring when they do go out into the natural environment. They're exploring. So the forest schools has given them that opening, and just actually having more access to the outdoors on a day-to-day basis, I believe, is the sort of foundation. And it's interesting because I've spoken to some forest school people about it, that my journey's gone from sort of, it's kind of gone down, and it's gone from that weekly experience to a daily experience. But I very much feel that the work that we're doing on the outdoors thinking is the foundation, because what it's supporting is practitioners and children being outdoors on a daily basis, being familiar with the outdoors and doing that for a period of time. And then through that familiarity, they can then explore going out on a forest school kindergarten, or going out on a forest school's sessions if they have to travel off site or something like that. It means they're much better equipped to being outdoors in those environments, because they've actually been outdoors a lot in their own environment. And then those steps outdoors to go off on adventures are much more obtainable, because their base level is at a much higher level. Because I know that from sort of within forest schools, seeing a lot of people going on forest schools have been told that they have to go on, the school have sent them, but their interest in the outdoors might not be particularly high, and their personal ability to be outdoors is quite low. So that means that they are struggling to engage fully in some of the training because they're not familiar with being outdoors. So you might have a couple of participants who are struggling to take in the information, because just being outside is just such an alien concept for them. And again, I think just everybody spending time outside, is going to support sort of more projects like forest schools in the future. So that sort of route has been quite exciting one to support, like say, parents, and getting practitioners to get the outdoors right, where the really rich play and learning can happen, but to engage parents and the other members of staff in the settings to really get behind outdoor play.
Yeah, it's that like small steps incrementing up, like so.
Yeah,
that daily play outside is the foundation for them moving further in to the wilderness.
yeah. And I think that what happens a lot where people are just running 6-week forest school projects is which does happen a lot. I mean, it's not exactly what we want. We'd like it to be year round, but it happens a lot that the children only have 6 weeks, and then they might not have it again till the following year, or might be a couple of years or something like that. Is that if they've spent a lot of time outside in their setting prior to going out in the forest school, then the first few weeks aren't completely taken up with just experiencing being outdoors. They're familiar with being outdoors, they're familiar with risk taking, they're familiar with sort of leading their own play. The adults are comfortable in the outdoors, they know how to be in the outdoors, they know how to facilitate that play in the outdoors. So then heading off to forest schools or heading off into some woodland, that deep, rich forest school experience can be achieved sort of at a slightly quicker pace, and hopefully means that if the projects are shorter, then the children can kind of engage in those projects fully for that period of time, but still get the benefits of being outdoors in their own setting, because it's not always possible, is it, for everyone to get off site, or it's not easy for them to do it, or there's a big cost implication. So again, I think focusing on site to then support off site. I appreciate that some places have got their own forest schools on site, but that whole move to forest schools as opposed to just in your setting, in your yard or whatever.
Just on that, in terms of access to the outdoors, you know, some people might have very small grounds, or just a grass field, or even just a playground in perhaps some more urban settings. Do you have any thoughts or tips or advice in terms of accessing the outside, in terms of if somebody's completely new to this, where to start with having access or improving access?
Well, I think the first thing is that you don't need to spend loads of money. So a lot of settings, whatever, will get like some fixed play equipment in, or have their grounds developed. And that's not, I mean, it depends, obviously, in some situations that might be necessary, but on the whole, that's not necessary, and you can achieve it on a much, much smaller budget. And to look at the whole concept of, for me, obviously, I was mentioned before about loose parts. Loose parts are amazing because they can be used across each other. They don't have a sort of set thing that they're used for. So you could have some guttering that maybe is used for transporting water along, but then it also could be the ridge of a den, and it could also be an artistic structure. So a loose part can be used in sort of all sorts of different ways, and it kind of gives affordance for play. So there's so many ideas that can come out of that, and so many ways it can be used. So I think for people looking at using their outdoor space is, firstly, look at really simple resources that can be used in many different ways. So a mud kitchen is like that, where I'm not talking about the things that are shaped like little cupboards that you buy, but I'm talking about just the play area being a mud play area with some planks and some mud, if that's the setting could have that. So something like that, but just to introduce things slowly, but that make sure that the resources are available to play with, and there's an abundance of those resources to be used, to be adapted, and to be manipulated. It might be that you've got, like I said before, like a science area, but construction area, you've got some blocks and planks, and there's plenty of them. So substantial projects can be built with those different things, and they can be used. And then you could use your construction planks and take it to your mud kitchen and build some tables and chairs and have a cafe or something like that. So there's different affordances that the loose parts have got. So I would say, to me, loose parts is always the answer, because they're just fab. They can be cheap, if not completely free, if you can engage parents and explain what you're trying to do, and then look to bring in the resources. Recycled resources are fantastic, because it's amazing how interesting it is if someone clears out a bit of a cupboard and has some stuff that you can use in your loose parts area. Then there's amazing that what imaginative stories can come out of these resources that are recycled and found or donated to the setting. So yeah, so I think to have loose parts that are brought in cheaply, but then to bring in a collection and allow time for that collection to settle in before you add. So not to just sort of transform an area and bring loads of things in all at once. So just bring it in, let it play out a bit of time, and then add to it, particularly where the children's interest lies. So the children are interested in mining, you could send out a newsletter saying, just in our loose parts area, the children have been doing a lot of play around mining. I just wondered if anybody's got any resources that might be of interest. And you never know what's going to crop up. Somebody might have one of those sort of agate crystals, where and you might get one of those come along, and what imaginative play will come from someone sort of supplying one of those. So, and I think when you're saying about if someone's just got a little asphalt yard or a little area of grass, it's amazing what you can do in those areas. I think I was talking to you before about active boundaries. So it's something I'm working on at the moment, where you kind of have a boundary that invites children to cross it and come into an area to participate, that has a feeling within that area where a certain type of play is going to happen in that area. So yeah, I think there's no limit to having a bit of a boring site, but the key is about bringing it in, and for the children to generate their own rules and regulations of where the materials can be and what you can do. If you've got something long, it might be the children always have to carry it with 2 people, one at either end, so that people aren't getting hit with it being carried. So little simple things like that. That's the beauty of bringing them in gradually, so the resources can be explored, and that any issues that you might have with the provision that you've got around that loose part can be dealt with in a building up way, so that gradually the parts are being used in the way that is safe, and the way that children can really explore and do some fantastically deep play with.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for talking, because I've suddenly realised what the time is, and I am sure like we probably both could talk about play for a lot longer, because it's such an awesome topic.
I'm sure we've got about 20 more high horses we could kind of
Yeah, we could do the Grand National. Totally. Maybe we'll have to have another conversation sometime in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And one of the threads that I've noticed that has kept popping up in this conversation is about the importance of sort of reflecting on ourselves as the adult facilitating the play, whether it is, you know, do we know how to dress comfortably, or whether it's our own kind of values around risk or adversity, or, you know, when to step in with the play. Yeah, that thread seems to have popped up as we've gone through the conversation. So that's what I think I'd be particularly taking away: the importance of looking at ourselves first when we're facilitating play. How can people find out more about your work and what you have to offer?
Well, so on Muddyfaces, there's a massive outdoor hub which has got information. It's got hundreds of activities all to do with it. It's all free, so you just go on there and just wander around. It's a massive catalogue. I set the outdoor hub up as a result of always being in Facebook groups and people asking questions and getting like activity ideas. And then after about 3 months of being in the same group, you're like, I'm just fed up of people asking the same question and getting the same sort of answers. It's like, I kind of felt like it would be great if there was like a library where you could put all those ideas. So the outdoor hub was originally set up so people can contribute to the outdoor hub and can put their own resources on there. And quite a lot of people do it if they've got a website they want, you know, they put an activity on and we can share to their website where there might be more activities and things like that. So yeah, there's loads of activities, loads of information. There's event section. So, and it's all about the outdoors. So Muddyfaces is about the outdoors, about supporting people to be outside and to engage in play and learning outdoors and forest schools. So yeah, just go to the Muddyfaces website and go and have a look at the outdoor hub. There's loads of stuff in there. And then if you're interested in this training that I'm working on at the moment, which is outdoorsthinking.co.uk. So it's a website, you can go and visit there, and it's really interesting. There's a course there called the Certificate in Outdoor Practice. So that's fantastic. And it covers pretty much most of the stuff that I was saying, but it's all around your setting rather than forest schools. So it's really fantastic stuff going on at Outdoors Thinking as well. So there's those two websites to find out. What an interesting bit would, if you go to the Muddyfaces website, definitely go and root out some of the books. So there's in the mud section, there's Making a Mud Kitchen. It's translated into about 13 different languages, so should accommodate everybody or loads of people there. So yeah, just there's loads of stuff on it. Just go and have an explore, keep you busy.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, there's an amazing abundance of wonderful resources on your website, so I hope people do go and check that out. And yeah, a big thank you for joining me this afternoon. I've enjoyed having a good rant and chatting about play. It's one of my favorites.
Thank you very much for speaking to you.